What happens when a fairy tale marriage turns into a public nightmare? For Elara Thorne, the grand ballroom of the St. Regis, shimmering with crystal and old money, was supposed to be a celebration of her husband's success. She stood by his side, a perfect picture of devotion, her couture gown flowing over the gentle curve of her 8-month pregnancy. He was the prince of New York real estate. She was his adoring wife, carrying their heir. But in one glittering champagne-fueled moment, her prince would reveal himself to be a monster, and the facade of their perfect life would not just crack, it would eclode before the city's elite. The air in their Park Avenue penthouse was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and unspoken resentment. Elara Thorne adjusted the midnight blue silk of her custom Serafina gown, her fingers tracing the delicate embroidery that struggled to distract from the taut, heavy sphere of her belly. At 8.5 months pregnant, she felt less like a goddess of fertility and more like a ship navigating treacherous waters. Every movement was a negotiation, every breath a conscious effort. "Are you almost ready?" Julian's voice, smooth as polished granite, cut through the silence from the master suite's doorway. He stood there already, a vision of tailored perfection in his Tom Ford tuxedo. Julian Thorne didn't just wear clothes, he inhabited them, his confidence a magnetic field that bent the world to his will. "Almost," Elara murmured, turning to face him. She had chosen the dress weeks ago, hoping it would make her feel elegant, ethereal. Now, under his critical gaze, she felt large, cumbersome. His eyes swept over her, a swift, almost imperceptible inventory that managed to miss her hopeful expression entirely. "That color. It makes you look rather pale, don't you think?" The comment landed like a small, sharp stone in her chest. It wasn't overtly cruel, but it was Julian's specialty. The subtle erosion of her confidence chipping away at her piece by piece until she felt like a ruin. "I thought it brought out my eyes," she offered weakly, her hand instinctively going to her stomach, where their son was currently practicing his kicks. He grunted, turning his attention to his platinum cufflinks. "The car is downstairs. Beatrice is already texting, wondering where we are. You know how she gets about punctuality at these things." Beatrice Thorne, Julian's mother, was a woman who believed tardiness was a moral failing on par with grand larceny. The event, the Thorne Foundation's annual Starlight Gala, was the crown jewel of her social calendar and Julian's biggest philanthropic display of the year. It was an evening dedicated to raising money for underprivileged children, a cause that felt deeply ironic, given how little attention Julian paid to his own impending fatherhood. "I just need to put on my shoes," Elara said, moving towards the velvet ottoman. The simple act of bending down was a monumental task. She gritted her teeth, her back screaming in protest, as she fumbled with the delicate straps of her Jimmy Choos. Julian watched her struggle for a moment, his expression unreadable before sighing with theatrical impatience. "For God's sake, Elara, we'll be late." He didn't move to help. He simply stood there, a handsome statue of irritation. Tears pricked at the back of her eyes, hot and unwelcome. She swallowed them down, a familiar cocktail of humiliation and frustration. This was their life now. The loving glances had been replaced by critical stares, the tender touches by impatient sighs. The man who had once written her poetry and flown her to Paris for a weekend now looked at her as if she were a line item on his balance sheet that was underperforming. She blamed the pregnancy at first, the hormones, the changes to her body, the shift in their social life. But the coldness had started before that, a creeping frost that began when his real estate empire Thorne Global Properties had secured the landmark Hudson Yards redevelopment deal. His success had inflated his ego to terrifying proportions, leaving little room for anything or anyone else. Finally securing the shoes, she stood up, her breath coming in short, shallow bursts. "Okay, I'm ready." He gave her another once-over, his lips a thin, displeased line. "Try to stand up straight tonight. The slouching doesn't help." He then turned and walked out, leaving the words hanging in the air like poison. As she followed his imposing figure through their cavernous apartment, her hand once again found her belly. The baby kicked a strong, reassuring thump against her palm. "It's just you and me, little one." She thought a wave of fierce, protective love washing over her. "It's always been just you and me." The ride down in the private elevator was silent. The air in the chauffeured Maybach was colder still. Julian was on his phone, his thumb flying across the screen, a small, secretive smile playing on his lips as he texted. Elara looked out the window, watching the glittering lights of Manhattan blur past. Each light represented a life, a story, a world of its own. Her own world, once so bright and full of promise, felt like it was shrinking, dimming, collapsing in on itself, until the only thing left was the hollow echo of what used to be. She was Mrs. Julian Thorne, a name that unlocked any door in the city. But tonight it felt less like a title and more like the name of a very beautiful, very expensive The grand ballroom of the St. Regis was a symphony of excess. 3-tiered crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small car, dripped light onto a sea of 1,000 guests. The air hummed with the murmur of powerful conversations, the clinking of champagne flutes, and the soft strains of a live jazz quartet. This was Julian's kingdom, and as they entered, he transformed. The cold, dismissive husband from the penthouse melted away, replaced by Julian Thorne, the charismatic titan, the beloved philanthropist. He clasped shoulders, kissed cheeks, and laughed a deep, resonant laugh that made women blush and men feel impotent. Elara was the accessory on his arm, the silent, smiling testament to his perfect life. Julian darling. Beatrice Thorne descended upon them, a formidable figure in emerald green taffeta and a fortress of diamonds. Her smile was as bright and hard as her jewelry. "You're late, fashionably, mother," Julian said, kissing the air beside her cheek. Beatrice's eyes the same piercing blue as her son's raked over Elara. "Elara, dear, that dress is a bold choice. The navy is so draining when one is already feeling tired." "I feel wonderful, Beatrice, thank you," Elara replied, forcing a smile that felt like cracking plaster. Beatrice's attention had already shifted back to her son. "All the important donors are by the silent auction. Councilman Miller is here, and I think I saw Robert Harrison from the board of MoMA. You must go and charm them." She shooed him away as if dismissing a servant. Julian gave Elara's arm a perfunctory squeeze. "Mingle," he commanded under his breath. "And for heaven's sake, try to look happy. People are watching." He was gone in an instant, absorbed into a throng of influential figures, leaving Elara standing alone at the edge of the glittering crowd. She felt like a boy cut loose from its mooring adrift in an ocean of strangers who looked through her as if she were glass. She found a quiet spot near a marble column, accepting a glass of sparkling water from a passing waiter. From her vantage point, she could watch the room. She could watch Julian. He was magnificent, she had to admit. He moved with an innate predatory grace, his charisma a tangible force. And then she saw her. Serena Vance. Serena was the lead counsel for a rival development firm, a woman known for being as brilliant as she was ruthless. She was everything Elara was not sharp-edged, impossibly chic, in a silver form-fitting gown, her blonde hair cut in a severe, stylish bob. She and Julian were professional adversaries, yet they were laughing together, their heads bent close. There was an intimacy in their posture, a shared energy that made Elara's stomach clench. It wasn't the first time she had seen them like this. At other events, she'd noticed their prolonged conversations, the way his eyes would follow Serena across a room. She'd told herself it was just business, professional respect. But the secretive smile on Julian's face as he texted in the car flashed in her mind. It was the same smile he was giving Serena Vance right now. If looks could kill, that woman would be a pile of ash, a familiar voice said beside her. Elara started turning to see her best friend, Chloe. Chloe was an art gallery owner with a no-nonsense attitude and an allergy to phoniness, which made her presence at an event like this a true act of solidarity. "I don't know what you're talking about." Elara lied, her gaze still fixed on Julian and Serena. "Don't you?" Chloe followed her line of sight. "Ah, the Ice Queen and the Idiot King, a match made in corporate hell." Chloe took a sip of her champagne. "Listen, Elara, we need to talk." "Not here, Chloe." "Yes, here." Chloe insisted, her voice low and urgent. "I had a drink with a friend from law school last week. He works at Serena's firm. He said the whispers are getting louder, that Thorne and Vance aren't just professional rivals anymore." Elara's heart began to beat, a frantic, painful rhythm against her ribs. Whispers. What whispers? That their rivalry is just a cover, that they're working on something together, a backdoor deal, and that their partnership isn't strictly business. The floor seemed to tilt beneath Elara's feet. She gripped the marble column for support. She had suspected. She had felt it in her bones for months. The late nights at the office, the unexplained business trips, the growing emotional chasm between them. But hearing it spoken aloud, given voice by someone else, made it terrifyingly real. "He wouldn't," she whispered, trying to convince herself. "Not now. Not with the baby coming." Chloe's expression softened with pity. "Oh, honey, men like Julian don't see a baby as a reason to be faithful. They see it as a cage they need to escape from. And Serena Vance is the shiniest escape hatch in Manhattan." Just then a sharp, unfamiliar pain shot through Elara's lower back. She gasped, her hand flying to the spot. "Are you okay?" Chloe asked, her face etched with concern. "You're as white as a sheet." "I'm fine," Elara breathed, forcing the pain down. "It's just Braxton Hicks. The doctor said to expect them." But it felt different, sharper, more insistent. The baby shifted violently inside her as if he too could sense the poison in the air. She looked back across the room. Julian had placed a hand on the small of Serena Vance's back, guiding her towards the terrace. It was a gesture of ownership, a gesture that had once belonged to her. The whispers in her own mind were now louder than the buzz of the gala. The puzzle pieces she had refused to look at for so long were snapping into place, forming a picture of betrayal so vast and cruel it stole her breath. And as another, more intense cramp seized her, she had a terrible sinking feeling that the evening was about to get much, much worse. The next hour was a blur of polite smiles and empty conversations. Elara moved through the ballroom on autopilot, the twin pains in her back and her heart radiating through her body. She spoke to acquaintances who asked about the nursery, fended off unsolicited advice from older women, and dodged Beatrice's disapproving glares. All the while she was acutely aware of Julian, who had returned from the terrace without Serena, his mood inexplicably buoyant. The main event of the evening was Julian's speech. He was to accept an award for Philanthropist of the Year, a title his PR team had worked tirelessly to secure. As he ascended the stage, the room fell into a reverent silence. A spotlight found him, turning him into a golden, godlike figure. He began by thanking the foundation, the board, and the generous donors. He spoke of legacy, of building a better future, of the responsibility of the fortunate to help the less fortunate. His voice was a rich, captivating baritone, weaving a spell of sincerity over the audience. Elara had heard versions of this speech 100 times, and it always managed to sound convincing. Tonight it sounded like a cacophony of lies. But a man is nothing without his foundation, Julian said, his eyes scanning the crowd. He is nothing without the bedrock that supports him, that allows him to build his legacy towards the sky. Elara felt a flicker of hope. Was he talking about her? About their family? Maybe she had been wrong. Maybe Chloe was mistaken. His eyes finally landed on her, and for a moment they held her gaze. But there was no warmth in them, only a cold, calculating glint. A slow, cruel smile spread across his handsome face. And as many of you know, he continued, his voice dripping with false sentiment, my own foundation is expanding. A wave of warm, appreciative laughter rippled through the room. People turned to smile at Elara. She felt her cheeks flush, a mixture of embarrassment and a desperate, foolish hope. My lovely wife Elara is here tonight, he said, gesturing towards her. The spotlight swung from him and settled on her, blinding her. She was pinned a butterfly on a board. She has been my greatest project, taking her from a simple small-town girl and giving her the world. The tone had shifted. The warmth in the room cooled. The laughter died, replaced by an uncomfortable, uncertain silence. Elara's smile froze on her face. This wasn't a tribute. It was a prelude to an execution. And now, Julian said, his voice taking on a tone of mock lament, she is embarking on her own great project motherhood. She has truly embraced the domestic arts. She has let herself go in the most beautiful way, of course, swelling with purpose, you might say. A few sycophantic guests chuckled nervously, but most of the room was dead silent, watching the public vivisection with a kind of horrified fascination. He was painting her as a simple brood mare, a bumpkin he had elevated, and who was now fulfilling her rustic biological destiny. He was diminishing her, erasing her identity as an accomplished architect, as his partner in front of everyone they knew. He wasn't done. He leaned closer to the microphone, a conspiratorial glint in his eye. Some people build empires of steel and glass, he said, pausing for effect. Others are content to build nurseries. And I, for one, think that is a beautiful, if somewhat limited, ambition. Let's hear it for Elara, everyone. For her, commitment. The applause was sparse, hesitant, and died out almost as soon as it began. The spotlight released her swinging back to Julian as he basked in the aftermath of his cruelty. But Elara barely noticed. She was no longer in the ballroom. She was in a vacuum. The air sucked from her lungs, the world a distant roaring sound in her ears. Every insecurity he had ever cultivated in her, every casual insult, every dismissive gesture had just been weaponized and fired at her in a public forum. He hadn't just insulted her, he had tried to annihilate her. He had redefined her to this entire room as a simple-minded, unambitious vessel for his heir, a project he had completed and was now setting aside. The hot tears she had been fighting all night finally broke free, tracing silent, searing falls down her cheeks. Her whole body trembled, a seismic shudder of grief and rage. And deep within her another more powerful tremor answered. A violent, clenching agony ripped through her abdomen, stealing her breath and making her see stars. This was not Braxton Hicks. This was the raw, primal cry of a body pushed beyond its limits. Her fairy tale had ended. The monster was real. And her baby, her innocent son, had decided he had had enough of living in this gilded cage. He was coming. Now. The world swam back into focus with agonizing slowness. Julian was off the stage accepting congratulations from people who studiously avoided making eye contact with Alara. The jazz quartet started playing again, a frantic attempt to paper over the gaping hole of awkwardness Julian had torn in the evening's fabric. Alara didn't care. The only thing she could focus on was the fire in her belly. Rage, pure and incandescent, burned away her tears, leaving a terrifying clarity in its wake. She had to get to him. She had to confront him. Pushing her chair back, she stood up on shaky legs. Chloe was instantly at her side. "Alara, let's go. I'll get you out of here." "No," Alara said, her voice a low, dangerous growl she didn't recognize as her own. "Not yet." She began to walk, each step a testament to her willpower. The crowd parted before her as if she were a ghost, their faces a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. She kept her eyes locked on Julian, who was laughing with a group of investors, holding his Philanthropist of the Year award like a scepter. He saw her approaching, and his smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He excused himself, turning to meet her in a small alcove, hidden behind a towering floral arrangement. The music and chatter of the gala provided a thin veil of privacy. "What do you think you're doing?" he hissed, his voice stripped of all its public charm. "You're making a scene." "I'm making a scene," she whispered, her voice trembling with suppressed fury. "You just stood on a stage and described your pregnant wife as a quaint little project you're tired of. You humiliated me in front of everyone we know." He had the audacity to look bored. "Oh, for God's sake, Alara, it was a joke. A little roast. You're being overly sensitive. It must be the hormones." "The hormones?" Her laugh was a brittle, broken sound. "You stood there talking about building a legacy while you're systematically destroying the only family you have. Is that part of the joke too?" "This," he said, gesturing vaguely between them, "is not my legacy. My legacy is the Thorn global skyline. It's the deals, the power, the name. This is just a chapter, a domestic requirement." The cruelty of his words was so profound, so absolute, that it felt like a physical blow. A domestic requirement. Their marriage, their child, their entire life together reduced to a box he had to check. And Serena Vance. The name slipped from her lips before she could stop it. Is she a domestic requirement too, or is she in the next chapter? Julian's face went rigid. The mask of indifference fell away, replaced by pure, cold rage. "You will not speak her name," he seethed, taking a step closer. "You have no idea what you're talking about. You're hysterical." "I'm not hysterical," she said, her voice rising. "I am finally awake." And then it happened. Another contraction, fiercer and more powerful than any before, seized her body. It was a wave of pure agony that buckled her knees. She cried out a raw, involuntary sound of shock and pain. She grabbed his tuxedo jacket for support, her knuckles white. "What now?" he snapped, trying to pry her fingers off his lapel. More dramatics. But then he followed her horrified gaze downwards. A dark, spreading stain was blossoming on the front of her midnight blue Serafina gown. A sudden warm gush ran down her legs, soaking her shoes and pooling on the polished marble floor. Her water had broken. The moment was so cinematic, so utterly dramatic, that for a second neither of them moved. It was the ultimate irrefutable biological truth. A visceral, messy reality crashing into Julian's perfectly curated evening. The baby was coming. The domestic requirement was demanding to be met. Elara stared at the puddle at her feet, then up at her husband's face. The anger was gone, replaced by something far worse. Panic and sheer, undisguised disgust. He looked at her at the evidence of her labor as if she were something unclean that had just ruined his party. The spell of his power over her was shattered. The last vestiges of love, of hope, of shared history evaporated in that single contemptuous glance. There was no us anymore. There was only her and the baby she would protect with her life, and him a stranger whose cruelty knew no bounds. The breaking point had been reached, and the waters that now pooled on the floor were washing away her old life forever. Chaos erupted in their small, semi-private corner of the gala. A woman who had been standing nearby gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God! Her water broke!" The words cut through the music and chatter like a siren. Heads turned. The murmuring grew louder, more frantic. Julian's perfectly controlled world was imploding in the most public and primal way imaginable. "Do something!" Elara gritted out, leaning heavily against the wall as another contraction ripped through her. Julian was frozen, his face a mask of horror. His meticulously planned evening, his moment of triumph, was being literally washed away. He looked trapped, a cornered animal, desperate for an escape route. Chloe pushed through the gathering circle of onlookers, her face a mixture of fury and concern. "Someone call 911, she shouted, taking Elara's arm. "Elara, breathe. Just breathe." "Get her out of here," Julian hissed at Chloe, his voice low and venomous. "Take her through the service entrance. I don't want a scene." "A scene?" Chloe rounded on him, her eyes blazing. "You're worried about a scene. Your wife is in labor. Where the hell is your humanity?" People were closing in their phones, discreetly raised. This was a scandal far more interesting than any silent auction. Julian Thorne, the great philanthropist, the family man, looking at his wife in her moment of ultimate vulnerability, with nothing but cold fury. Panic finally spurred Julian into action, but it was a selfish, desperate panic, focused solely on damage control. He fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking. I need to manage this." He wasn't calling an ambulance. He wasn't calling his mother. He was scrolling through his contacts, his mind clearly on his business, on the fallout. The pain was immense, but through it, Elara found a pocket of chilling calm. It was the calm of a soldier on a battlefield who knows there's no going back. She watched her husband, the father of the child, fighting its way into the world, and saw with absolute certainty what his priorities were. "Don't bother calling your office, Julian," she said. Her voice, though strained, cut through the noise. It was clear and sharp as a shard of ice. Julian froze his thumb, hovering over the screen of his phone. The immediate crowd fell silent, sensing a new act was about to begin in this terrible play. He looked at her, his eyes wide with a warning. "Don't you dare." She dared. Fueled by the agony of childbirth and the inferno of his betrayal, she looked him dead in the eye. "There's no point in trying to salvage your precious Hudson Yards deal tonight," she said, her voice gaining strength with every word. A collective gasp went through the onlookers. The Hudson Yards deal was the biggest, most contested real estate venture in the city, and Thorne Global Properties was in a bitter final stage battle for it. Elara took a deep, shuddering breath as the contraction began to subside. She then turned her head slightly, her gaze sweeping over the horrified, fascinated faces in the crowd until it landed on one in particular: Serena Vance. Serena had been drawn in by the commotion and was standing near the edge of the circle, her face a perfect porcelain mask of neutrality. But Elara could see the flicker of panic in her cold grey eyes. "After all," Elara continued, her voice ringing out in the sudden silence, "why don't you just ask your partner for help?" She held Serena's gaze. "Serena Vance seems to be the one you're building this new future for anyway. I'm sure she can handle the crisis." The name landed like a bomb. The silence that followed was absolute, a deafening void where 100 different realizations dawned at once. The whispers Chloe had heard, the late-night meetings, the hand on the back. It wasn't just an affair. It was a professional conspiracy. Julian Thorne and his biggest rival, Serena Vance, were in bed together, literally and figuratively. He wasn't competing with her for the Hudson Yards deal. He was colluding with her. The public rivalry was a sham, a brilliant, audacious lie to manipulate the market and sideline other competitors. Serena Vance's composure finally shattered. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking stark and skeletal under the ballroom lights. Julian looked between his wife and his mistress, his face a grotesque tableau of rage and utter devastation. He had been exposed, his personal and professional lives detonated simultaneously by the woman he had just tried to erase. Another contraction hit Elara harder this time. She cried out, sinking towards the floor. But Chloe, and surprisingly, an older gentleman she vaguely recognized as Robert Harrison from the MoMA board, caught her. "Get this man away from her," Mr. Harrison commanded, glaring at Julian with utter contempt. The unveiling was complete. In the opulent ballroom, surrounded by the city's elite, the truth had been laid bare, not by a whisper, but by the raw, undeniable power of a woman scorned and a baby determined to be born into a world free of its father's lies. The wail of the ambulance siren was a welcome scream, drowning out the frantic, venomous whispers that had consumed the ballroom. The paramedics were efficient and professional, their presence a grounding force in the swirling vortex of drama. They loaded Elara onto a gurney, her blue dress stained and her face pale but resolute. Julian tried to get into the ambulance with her. "I'm her husband," he stated, as if the title still held any meaning. One of the paramedics, a stern-faced woman named Maria, blocked his path. Chloe stood right behind her. "Sir, she's under extreme stress. The doctor inside said only one person can ride with her to minimize agitation. She's asked for her friend." Maria's eyes were like steel. She had clearly assessed the situation in seconds. The look of impotent fury on Julian's face was something Elara would treasure. Defeated, he stepped back as the door slammed shut, leaving him on the curb, bathed in the flashing red and white lights, surrounded by the wreckage of his own making. Inside the ambulance, the ride to Lenox Hill Hospital was a surreal journey through pain and clarity. Between contractions that felt like her body was being torn in two, Chloe held her hand, murmuring words of encouragement, her presence a lifeline. Elara focused on her breathing, on the life force inside her, on the future. A future without Julian. 7 hours later, just as the dirty grey light of dawn began to break over the Manhattan skyline, Leo Alexander Thorne was born. He was small, angry, and perfect, with a tuft of dark hair and his mother's determined eyes. Holding him for the first time, Elara felt a love so overwhelming and pure that it eclipsed all the pain and betrayal. This was her legacy. This tiny, screaming, beautiful boy. Not a building of steel and glass, but a life of flesh and blood. Julian arrived at the hospital hours later. He didn't come to the maternity ward first. He came with his lawyer, a shark named Marcus Finch. They found Elara in her private room, Leo asleep in a bassinet beside her bed. Chloe stood guard, like a sentinel. "Elara," Julian began, his voice devoid of all emotion. "We need to discuss how we're going to handle this." "There is no we, Julian," she said, her voice tired but firm. "And there is nothing to handle other than our divorce." Marcus Finch stepped forward, holding a folder. "Mrs. Thorne, Julian, is prepared to be very generous, provided you sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding his business dealings and personal associations. We can release a joint statement about an amicable separation." Elara started to laugh. It was a raw, weary sound, but it was genuine. An NDA. Amicable. "Julian, did you not see what happened last night? The entire social and financial stratosphere of New York City watched you get exposed. Your personal association with Serena Vance is probably on the cover of the Post by now. The ship of Amicable has sailed, crashed into an iceberg, and sunk to the bottom of the ocean." Julian's face tightened. "Don't be a fool, Elara. Think of your son. You want him to have a comfortable life, don't you? You don't want a protracted, ugly legal battle." It was a threat, plain and simple. "Fight me, and I will ruin you." "What I want," she said, her eyes boring into his, "is for my son to have a mother he can be proud of. One who doesn't roll over and let a bully buy her silence. So you can take your generous offer and your NDA, and you can leave." She looked at her sleeping son. "His name, by the way, is Leo Alexander Reyes. Reyes was my mother's name. He will not carry the name of a man like you." The finality in her voice was absolute. Julian and his lawyer stood there for a moment, stunned into silence by her audacity. She was no longer the quiet, agreeable wife. The woman in this hospital bed was a stranger to them, forged in the fires of public humiliation and childbirth. "You will regret this," Julian snarled as they left. "I will fight you for everything. You will walk away with nothing." The door clicked shut, leaving Elara and Chloe in silence. "Are you sure about this?" Chloe asked softly. "He will make your life hell." Elara looked down at the tiny hand wrapped around her finger. Leo's hand. Her foundation. "He already did," she said. "Now I'm building something new." The aftershocks came quickly. The next day, the Thorne Global Board announced an internal investigation into the Hudson Yards bid. Serena Vance was fired from her firm. The gossip columns were having a field day, painting a lurid picture of corporate espionage and sordid affairs. Julian's philanthropic award was quietly rescinded. A week after Leo was born, a process server delivered the first legal documents to Elara's hospital room. It was a petition for sole custody, citing her emotional instability and public outburst as evidence of her being an unfit mother. The battle had just begun. But for the first time in a very long time, Elara Thorne Reyes felt ready for a fight. 1 year later, Elara stood on a dusty construction site in Brooklyn, a hard hat perched on her head and a roll of blueprints tucked under her arm. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of sawdust and the distant hum of the city. Before her, the steel skeleton of a building rose against the sky, the future site of the Reyes Community Center, a pro bono project she had designed and was now overseeing. Life after Julian was not easy, but it was real. His threats had not been idle. He had unleashed the full force of his legal team, attempting to bury her in motions and depositions. He had frozen their joint assets, forcing her to rely on Chloe, and alone from her estranged but now reconciled family. He painted her in the press as a vengeful, unstable gold digger. But he had made a critical miscalculation. He assumed the woman he was fighting was the same one he had married. He didn't account for the fact that by trying to destroy her, he had stripped away all her fear, leaving only resolve. With the help of a brilliant, tenacious female lawyer, Chloe had recommended Elara fought back. They used the testimony of dozens of gala attendees. They subpoenaed phone records between Julian and Serena. They brought in forensic accountants who uncovered the shell corporations Julian and Serena had created to funnel money and information for their collusive Hudson Yards bid. The custody battle was brutal, but Julian's own arrogance became his undoing. On the stand, his contempt for Elara, his dismissive attitude towards fatherhood, and his blatant narcissism were on full display for the judge. The court awarded Elara sole physical custody of Leo, with Julian granted only supervised visitation, which he rarely used. The divorce settlement, thanks to the evidence of his corporate malfeasance and infidelity, was far from the nothing he had promised her. It was substantial enough for her to start over not in opulence, but in comfort and independence. The Thorne-Vance empire had crumbled as spectacularly as it had been unveiled. Their backdoor deal for Hudson Yards collapsed under the weight of the scandal, and both of them became subjects of a federal investigation into market manipulation. Their affair, deprived of its glamorous high-stakes backdrop, had soured into bitter recriminations. Last Elara heard, they were suing each other. Julian's mother, Beatrice, had retreated from the social scene, her legacy tainted by her son's public disgrace. Elara sold the Park Avenue penthouse, a place that held only ghosts for her now. She bought a charming brownstone in a quiet Brooklyn neighborhood, trading sterile panoramic views for a small backyard with a swing set. Her life was smaller, but infinitely more full. It was filled with the sound of Leo's laughter, the smell of his baby shampoo, and the quiet satisfaction of her own work. She had reopened her own small architectural firm, Reyes Design, focusing on sustainable community-oriented projects, the kind of work that nourished her soul, not just her bank account. As she stood on the construction site, her phone buzzed. It was a picture message from Leo's nanny. He was at the park, sitting in a pile of autumn leaves, a huge, gummy smile on his face. Her heart swelled. That was her empire. That was her skyline. A man walked up beside her, holding 2 cups of coffee. It was Liam, an old friend from her university days, who had been at the gala that night. He was one of the few who had reached out in the aftermath, offering not pity but genuine friendship. He was a landscape architect, and they were collaborating on the community center's garden. "Thought you could use this," he said, handing her a cup. His smile was warm and uncomplicated. "It's looking good, Elara. Really good." "Thanks, Liam," she said, taking a sip. "It's a start." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the welders send sparks into the air as they fortified the building's foundation. Elara thought back to that night at the gala, a lifetime ago. Julian had called her his foundation, the bedrock that supported him. He had been wrong. She had never been his foundation. She had been trapped in his basement. Now she was finally building something on her own ground. Something strong, something true, something that was meant to last. And it was beautiful. 3 years passed in the fast-paced world of New York City. 3 years could be a lifetime. Kuntuku. For Elara it was. Her firm Reyes design had flourished. She'd earned a reputation for creating spaces that were not just beautiful, but soulful and humane. The Reyes Community Center in Brooklyn was a celebrated success, a vibrant hub of life that had become a model for urban renewal projects. She had won awards, been featured in architectural magazines, and most importantly had built a life of peaceful, joyful stability. Leo was now 4 years old, a whirlwind of energy and laughter, with his mother's bright, curious eyes and a stubborn chin that was all his own. He was the sun around which Elara's universe gracefully orbited. Her relationship with Liam had blossomed into a deep and loving partnership, built on a foundation of mutual respect and easy camaraderie. He was a gentle, steady presence in both her life and Leo's, a man who knew how to build a garden and nurture a family with the same patient hands. The spectre of Julian Thorne had faded. After the public implosion of his Hudson Yards scheme and the ensuing federal investigation, he had paid a massive fine and retreated from the public eye. The Thorne global empire was a shadow of its former self, and Julian, once the king of the city, had become a ghost. Elara had almost allowed herself to believe he was gone for good. But ghosts have a way of reappearing when you least expect them. It was a crisp Saturday in October. Elara, Liam, and Leo were at the playground in Central Park, the one near the carousel. Leo was shrieking with delight as Liam pushed him on the swings higher and higher. Elara sat on a nearby bench, sipping a warm coffee, a contented smile on her face. This simple, perfect moment was everything she had ever fought for. A beautiful family. The voice was unmistakable, smooth, confident, and laced with a familiar poison. Elara's blood ran cold. She turned slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. Julian Thorne stood there. He looked different, thinner perhaps, with a few more lines etched around his eyes, but still impeccably dressed in a cashmere coat that probably cost more than her car. He wasn't looking at her, but at Leo and Liam, a strange, unreadable expression on his face. "What are you doing here, Julian?" Elara's voice was steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside her. "It's a public park, isn't it?" He finally turned his gaze to her. He attempted a smile, a practiced, charming gesture that no longer reached his eyes. "I wanted to see my son." On the swings, Liam had noticed him. He slowed Leo's arc, his body tensing, his expression becoming guarded. "Your supervised visitation is on the first Sunday of the month at the designated center. You know that. You haven't shown up in 6 months." Elara stated, her tone flat and factual. "Those places are so sterile, impersonal," he said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "I've been doing a lot of work on myself, Elara. Therapy, soul-searching. I realize now how much I lost, how much I pushed away. I just want a chance to be a part of his life. A real part." The words were all correct. They were the words of a changed man. But Elara had spent years studying the nuances of Julian's manipulations. She could see the performance. He was an actor playing a role, and he was watching her intently, gauging her reaction. Liam brought a now quiet Leo over to the bench. Leo, who had only ever seen his biological father in pictures and during a few awkward early visitations, hid behind Liam's legs, peering out with suspicion. "Leo, this is Julian," Elara said softly, her protective instincts screaming. "You must be Liam," Julian said, extending a hand. His smile was wide, but his eyes were chips of ice. "Thank you for stepping in." The words were meant to sound gracious, but they were a clear assertion of territory, a reminder that Liam was merely a replacement. Liam shook his hand briefly, his grip firm. "I'm not stepping in. I'm part of this family." An awkward silence descended. Julian crouched down to Leo's level. "Hello, Leo. I'm your father." Leo just stared, his thumb finding its way into his mouth. "I have something for you," Julian said, pulling a small, elegantly wrapped box from his coat pocket. It was a miniature functioning replica of a vintage Aston Martin, a toy so extravagant and out of place for a playground that it was almost comical. Leo looked at the toy, then at his mother. Elara gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of her head. This was a transaction, not a gift. "He doesn't need toys, Julian. He needs a father who shows up," she said, her voice quiet but unyielding. Julian's mask of contrition slipped for a second. A flicker of his old, cold anger flashed in his eyes before he masked it again. He stood up, sighing dramatically. "I know I have a lot to make up for. That's why I'm here. I'd like to start spending more time with him. Real time. Here at the park. Maybe take him to a museum. We can discuss it through our lawyers," Elara said, standing up. "Come on, Leo. It's time to go." "Elara, please," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Don't do this. Don't punish me through him. I'm trying to make amends. For all of us." His sudden plea for sympathy was so audacious, so manipulative, that it almost took her breath away. But as he spoke, she noticed something. A man, sitting on a bench across the green, seemingly reading a newspaper. But the paper was angled just so, and the long lens of the camera tucked beside him was aimed directly at them. The truth hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't about Leo. This wasn't about amends or soul-searching. This was a photo-op. Julian was staging his redemption. The fallen mogul's heartbreaking reunion with his estranged son. It was a calculated PR move to rebuild his shattered image, and he was using their child as a prop. The last shred of her doubt vanished, replaced by a cold-hard fury. The echo of the man who had humiliated her at the gala was standing right here performing the same kind of public manipulation. Only this time the stage was a children's playground. She scooped Leo into her arms, holding him tight. "Get away from us, Julian," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "And tell your photographer he can go home." She turned and walked away, Liam at her side, leaving Julian standing alone by the swings with his expensive unwanted toy. He didn't call after her. The performance was over. His audience was leaving, and the mask had fallen completely. She could feel his silent, venomous rage following her all the way out of the park. She knew with a chilling certainty that this was not the end. It was a declaration of a new kind of war. The staged photos appeared online the next day on a notorious gossip blog. Julian Thorne, a changed man, trying to reconnect with his son, only to be coldly rebuffed by his bitter ex-wife and her new lover. The narrative was expertly crafted, painting him as a victim and her as the villain. It was a classic Julian move. If you can't win the truth, rewrite the story. For a few days, the story gained traction, and Elara felt the familiar sting of public judgment. But this time, she was not alone, and she was not silent. Her lawyer issued a concise, brutal statement detailing Julian's 6-month absence from scheduled visitations and the convenient presence of a paparazzi photographer at his spontaneous park visit. Public opinion, already wary of Julian, swung swiftly and decisively back against him. The attempt to use his son for PR backfired, making him look even more monstrous and calculating than before. It was the last straw. Enraged and publicly humiliated once again, Julian came for her. Not with lawyers or photographers, but with the raw, desperate fury of a king who had lost his kingdom and his power. He showed up at the grand reopening of the Reyes Community Center. It was the center's 3rd anniversary, and the event was a celebration of everything Elara had built. The main hall, a soaring space of reclaimed wood, exposed brick and vast windows she had designed, was filled with neighborhood families, local leaders, and the joyful noise of children. Elara was on a small stage, thanking the community with Liam and a happy tuxedo-clad Leo beside her. And then she saw him. Julian was standing at the back of the room, a thunderous expression on his face. He began to walk forward, his presence sucking the warmth and joy out of the air. The crowd parted, a wave of unease rippling through the room. He stopped at the foot of the small stage, looking up at her. "This is quite the little empire you've built," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "All on my money, of course. You should be thanking me." Elara's heart pounded, but her voice was calm as she spoke into the microphone. "Thank you all for coming," she said to the stunned crowd. "It seems we have one final unscheduled donor to acknowledge." She handed Leo to Liam, who gently led him to the side, shielding him. She stepped down from the stage to face Julian on the floor on his level. She was no longer looking down on him, nor was she cowering beneath him. They were for the first time equals. "You have nothing, Julian," she said, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "Your money didn't build this. This was built with talent and hard work. It was built with integrity. Concepts you wouldn't understand." "Integrity?" He scoffed, his voice rising. "Don't you dare preach to me about integrity. I picked you up from nothing. You were a small town girl with a portfolio of quaint little drawings. I gave you a name. I gave you a life. I gave you a son, and you threw it all away. You didn't give me anything, Julian. You tried to cage me," she corrected him, her gaze unwavering. "You thought I was a project you could build and then abandon like one of your glass towers. But you made a mistake. You thought my foundation was you. You were wrong." She gestured around the room, at the children, laughing at the families, talking at the vibrant art on the walls. "This is my foundation. Truth, community, love. Things you can't buy or bully or manipulate. You stand here in a house that truth built, and you are a ghost. Your empire was a house of cards Julian built on lies and secrets. It was destined to fall." He stared at her, his face contorted with a rage so profound it seemed to vibrate. He had come here for a final public showdown, expecting to shatter her with his presence, to remind her of his power. But his words had no effect. His anger was a storm breaking against a sea wall. She wasn't afraid of him anymore. She pitied him. In her calm, pitying eyes, Julian Thorne finally saw his own defeat. It wasn't a legal loss or a financial one. It was a total spiritual annihilation. He had no power here. He had no power over her. He was irrelevant. Without another word, he turned and stalked out of the building. No one watched him go. The life of the party, the community immediately swelled to fill the space he had vacated, the joyful noise returning as if he had never been there at all. Elara watched the door swing shut behind him, and for the first time she felt the last heavy chain of her past fall away. Liam came to her side, his hand finding hers. Leo ran to her, wrapping his small arms around her legs. She looked around the beautiful bustling room she had designed, at the smiling face of the man she loved, and at the bright, hopeful eyes of her son. She had once been the silent, pregnant wife, publicly shamed at a gala. Now she was the celebrated architect of her own life, standing strong in the house she had built, not from the ashes of her old life, but on a brand new, unshakable foundation of her own making. The story wasn't about him anymore. It was, and always had been, about her. Elara's story is a powerful reminder that sometimes our greatest breakdowns lead to our most profound breakthroughs. The night that should have been her ultimate humiliation became the moment of her liberation. She walked through the fire of public betrayal and emerged not as a victim, but as the architect of her own new life. Her journey from the gilded cage of Park Avenue to a place of true self-worth and happiness is a testament to the incredible strength that lies within us, often waiting for a crisis to be unleashed. If Elara's journey from heartbreak to empowerment moved you, please show your support by hitting the like button and sharing this video with someone who might need to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell so you don't miss our next story. In the comments below, tell us, have you ever witnessed a moment where the truth exploded in the most public way possible? We'd love to hear your story. Thank you for listening.